Welcome to the Action Podcast, produced by Action International Ministries. Our desire is to equip and encourage missionaries as they prepare for their time serving overseas and while they're on the field. We hope that this resource will be a blessing to you. For more information about Action, please visit us online at actioninternational.org. No matter where we go, we are faced with the reality that relationships must be nurtured well, and especially in the context of ministry and serving alongside others. Whether it's a husband and wife relationship or working on a team, the enemy wants to destroy those connections, and it's important that we fight to preserve them. Derek and Kristin Dearth, who served in Zambia, Africa for 7 years, have priceless thoughts on how we can maintain our relationships and thrive in ministry with one another in the process. Kristin, Derek, thank you for taking the time to talk about something that is very important to not just missions, life in general. It's relationships. Messy, it can be. Difficult, challenging, but beautiful all at the same time. God has called us into relationship, not only with himself, but with one another. We are built for community, but as such, it can be a little challenging at times to work within those different communities that God has called us to be in. But we're going to walk through some of those things, some of those challenges, some of those conflicts, things that can arise, and what God says about relationships and how we can enter into them well and live through them and come out on the other side, loving one another and loving God above all else. So yeah, Derek, just take it away and start this conversation on relationships.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So yeah, we're looking at relationships on the field. And one of the core relationships that you have as you head over to the field is your family. And how is your family doing? So I think sometimes we can think of our missionary calling as being, very personal, which it is. I'm called to do this, or me and my wife, or me and my husband are called to do this. But we don't always think about our family relationships. So before you go to the field, you really do need to take a moment or multiple moments with your local church, with your family, with your parents, if you have a good relationship with them, and how are we doing as a family as we head over to the field, and make sure that you're in a good spot. Because if you don't have, a strong core to your family, when you get on the field and you're under that pressure and the cross-cultural stress, you're going to start seeing things come out. Some families too, you'll meet from time to time, will try to fix their family by going to the field. So we're going to go to the field because, our marriage is struggling or our kids are struggling, and maybe that will fix those issues. I think for a small minority of people that may be the case, but for a lot of people, those issues get even bigger. Mm-hmm. So really making sure that you're in a healthy place before you go.
Yeah, that's really important. Yeah, you don't want to go for the wrong reason, for sure. And definitely when you talk about relationships and family, you don't want to have anything be exacerbated by, having a different culture at play. When it's something that's a struggle even in your own home culture, it's just going to be multiplied when you go overseas. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what about family changes or relationship things, Kristin, that you would like to share?
Yeah. And as Derek kind of shared, there's so many different dynamics that are at play. And where is your family at? Do you have kids? Do you not have kids? What ages are they? And so thinking through, even as you're leaving and you think about, maybe parent relationships you're leaving behind and the season of life that your parents are in, or children that you're leaving behind. There's so many different dynamics with that. And so much of it is preparing, just making sure that they're prepared well in the way that you can, so that you feel like, yep, I can leave in good conscience and know that they're in a good spot, as good as they can be for whatever you have control over. And when you're bringing, for us, our experience was we had kids on the field. We were single on the field. We were married on the field. We had young kids on the field. Yeah. And so we were in all of those stages looking at, educational needs for your young kids and for your school age kids. And do you have good school options there that work well for your kids.
Right.
Sometimes we really come into all of these things with like ideas of, this is what I'm going to do. I have this expectation that my kids are going to do all of the ministry stuff with us.
Right.
We're doing this as a family and we're going to go together. And guess what? Your kids might not do well in that situation, or the culture doesn't respond well in that situation. For whatever reason, things might not go exactly the way that you were planning for them to go, whatever your best, intentions were. And so you have to kind of be dynamic in that process. And that was one of the things that led to us actually leaving the field, is our kids' education, because it wasn't working the way that we thought.
Right.
There were not any of the right situations for us there. So we had to, that was one of the things that made us think, okay, I just don't know if this is going to work for us to be here in this situation anymore. But yeah, there are a lot of different factors that go into all of that. And as much as possible, I think drawing from other people's wisdom and experience about how do you stay married well on the field? Do you get time alone? Do you need that time alone? How much time do you guys need? Do you need a weekly date night? Do you need to get away once a year? And who's going to watch your kids if you have kids? And how do you fill yourselves up as a couple, but making sure that you really press into those things? And it might be having a different sort of like thinking outside the box for what works for your family. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think we all have idealistic expectations, and then what are the realistic expectations? So you might think, we want to live really incarnationally, we want to live close to these people that we're going to be ministering with, or these national partners, or whatever it is. And then you realize for your family or for your marriage, that just isn't a good idea, at least not in this season of your life or the situation that you're in. So those are all things to kind of keep in mind. But I want to transition just first to singleness and dating on the field. So all three of us had that experience. And it's an interesting dynamic. So I'm going to play host here, Adam, for a second and ask you a question of how did dating and singleness go on the field for you, and what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think it's very important to know that your calling for missions, for ministry, that's your primary calling for being on the field. That's why you're there. It's not to find a spouse, and it's not to date even. For me, Matthew 6:33, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. That was something that I went with just in my head as a mantra. And even our international director was like, take 6 months and make sure that you don't date, but I did. I took that to heart, and I honored that, but I also wasn't looking for that. And I had to be careful that, I'm there to serve. My ministry is to be there as a missionary to serve on this field in the Philippines. And so for me, it was making sure that I'm putting God first, that I'm pursuing the ministry that he has called me to do. So for me, I would encourage anybody that was going to the field as a single, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then God will provide for other things. And if it's your heart's desire to be married, it might happen. You might meet somebody on the field, you might not. But God knows that desire that you have in your heart, but seek God first. And so for me, I had to just pound that into my head because I desired to have a relationship, to meet someone. I didn't care where, but I knew God was going to provide that. It just so happened that it was in the Philippines. But I had to make sure that I was putting God first, that I wasn't putting the cart before the horse, right? So I think that's very important when you go out to the field as a single. If you're on the field as a single person, God knows your heart. But you do have to make sure that you're pursuing what he's called you to do and not get distracted by other things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good first step, is to make sure that that's your focus. And you will from time to time meet folks that it's like, oh, I kind of wonder if you're mostly here to find someone. And, when you're younger and you're going to join a team, that's not necessarily like a bad motivation. Sure. But yeah, your first and foremost needs to be to serve the Lord. A couple other things that I think we would recommend too is to really make sure that if you're a part of a team, that your team is aware of that relationship. I mean, depending on your organization and what regulations or rules they have around that, and then just healthy accountability.
Yeah, be
you know,
transparent.
there's a lot of temptation on the field. There's a lot of stresses on the field, and making sure that you have that accountability in place. Where, you're in a different place, it can look a lot different. And then even with national relationships, dating and marriage in the context that you're serving in may look extremely different.
That's right.
So how are you presenting to the national culture your relationship? And are you doing some sort of damage to Christ and the witness for Christ in how you're conducting that relationship? So, Kristin and I came from basically the same Midwestern culture.
Right.
You and LA came from different cultures.
Yes. Yeah.
So how was that, especially as you think about, to the team, but also to the host culture as well?
It was just that, though. Like, man, letting our action workers there speak into our relationship right from day one. I mean, I remember going up to our long, adored couple in the Philippines, serving there for many, many years, and right from day one, telling them I met someone. And they spoke really good, hard at times, truths into me, but they followed me and tracked with our relationship right from day one, right from that conference where I met LA. So that was helpful. You have to have people come in, and they knew the culture better than I did. I was there for 10.5 months at that point. So I didn't know the culture. I mean, barely. But they had been there for over 30 years at that point. So I let them speak into that. You have to be open to that and willing to have that accountability. Be transparent, but when they speak that to you, whatever it is that God puts on their heart, lean into that and trust that, because they've been on the field for longer. And so find people who can speak into that. And it could be your language, tutor, if you're in language school. For us, we were in a Christian language school, and these Filipinos were speaking into also my relationship with LA from day one, and they were helping guide that. They were teaching me cultural things. But there are so many layers. And I mean, even, you're from the same kind of culture, but there are family, every family's different, every background and family history is different. But then you add the cultural, the language, all those different layers. It really is like a big onion of peeling back those layers. And we're still doing that. I mean, we all are, right, in marriage. But definitely a lot of challenges, but it was made a lot easier by allowing missionaries that have been on the field for many, many years to speak into our relationship right from the start.
Yeah.
That was huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as I think back to Kristin and my relationship on the field, we got a lot of team involvement, a lot of team buy-in to our relationship, and national partner buy-in. So that was really encouraging. But I think looking back, we wish we would have done more with our families. And part of it was, it was 20 years ago in Zambia. So the connection was dial-up internet.
Yep.
And you could do AOL Instant Messenger. This is dating us a little bit.
Right.
And you could do like a really expensive phone call. So it was hard to get our family buy-in.
Yeah.
But when we came back to get married, and both of our families were a little bit like, we don't know this person. We've never met them before. And it was a little bit, they were more hesitant, where our team had seen us together. They had gotten to know us really well, living, working, ministering together. Yeah. So that's something too for workers to keep in mind if they do meet someone on the field and it's a healthy relationship. It really seems like God is orchestrating this, that the family buy-in, the home sending church buy-in might not be as strong or as robust at first, because they just haven't had that time
they just don't
together.
Know. Yeah.
But
one quick thing that I just want to sort of tie in with all of that is the dynamic of, we all met on our spouses on the field.
Right.
And that's helpful because we were both already walking on this path of missions. We already felt that call of God on our life to mission work. And so I was like, great, this makes sense.
Yeah.
Some people are coming at it from, they've been in their home culture and they're already married and they feel the call, but their spouse maybe doesn't to the same degree.
Yeah.
And so there's a dynamic there then as they are moving to the field and getting onto the field, that it's like just to, I think, have sensitivity to that dynamic of one may not be as passionate about the ministry, or depending on how they work in their marriage, maybe it's like, well, my husband is really called to this ministry, to this teaching ministry or this whatever ministry, and I'm going to be raising the kids at home, and I don't, it's not as much, but that's definitely a dynamic and can really create stress in the marriage relationship when they get on the field.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, in our marriage, we didn't have to deal with that, obviously, right? Because we had met on the field, and God was already working in Alay's heart for ministry full time. So it made sense for her, and there wasn't any convincing. But for our marriage, when we come to a point where we need to make a decision, and I feel strongly one way and she feels strongly the other, our prayer individually to God during those times is, okay, God, you're either going to change my heart and align it with Alay's, or Alay's her heart's going to change and align with mine. But it doesn't happen all the time, because at some point you do have to submit to your husband, right? And that's a whole nother discussion and conversation. But at the end of the day, God does, in his grace and mercy, align our hearts to the point where, okay, my heart will catch up. I'm mostly there, but my heart will catch up. And same for Alay. I'm mostly there, but my heart will fully catch up at some point.
Right.
But as much as possible, praying together, seeking the Lord, because you want to be united, right? You want that unity. You want to go with that same calling. But if there are things that are like, oh, it's just a personal, no for me, but it's not really what God is saying, then maybe you just need to trust the Lord and take that step of faith. Yeah. So that's family. Making sure you have that set, making sure you have those conversations, making sure that if you're single, you're putting God first, you're pursuing ministry, and then you're moving into now you're on the field in a team. What is the team dynamics of relationship? How does that play into this whole topic?
Yeah, I think, again, we've talked about before, figuring out your expectations and your organization's expectations for team, which may look very different, and what your team members may see as expectations. So I think as you're pursuing the call towards missions, and you're starting to kind of interview an organization, interview a team, how would you fit? Is the Lord leading in this direction? How's your home church? Are they on board with all of this? Is really figuring out what do I expect from this team? And that might look very different. Yeah. So some people are like, I'm pretty independent. I can kind of do things myself, but to have some folks around me that can help, that have a little camaraderie. Maybe we get together once a week for staff meeting. That sounds great. Yeah. Other people are like, I'm expecting you to be my best friend, and I'm expecting you to be my accountability partner. And I'm expecting you to get together at Christmas, and it'll feel exactly how it does at home, and you're going to fulfill all these relational needs for me. So you really have to figure out, because then when those expectations aren't met, it's like, oh, they don't want to hang out on Christmas. That's weird. I thought that's what we were coming to do. And, this is what our ministry team at my church always did, and I don't feel the same way here, or whatever it is. Those things. So what are those unmet expectations, or what are your expectations going into it?
Yeah. And sometimes the enemy, a lot of times, will use that expectation that hasn't been met as a wedge to drive between the team and create that disunity. Just kind of throw that wrench into the whole relationship. And then communication starts to break down. People feel hurt, and then all of a sudden it becomes this huge issue. So the talking and having good communication as a team in terms of team dynamics, I think, is a huge thing, pressing into that and talking through those expectations. And it could be done even before they leave for the field, right? Talking with the team, what is it going to be like? Working with that team leader, working with the other people. Am I going to fit into that? What's my role in that? I do have my ministry, maybe outside of that team. I might not be working with those team members directly, but you do want to have that fellowship with those team members. Right. So you do have to have that conversation about what the expectation is going to be.
Yeah. A friend of mine one time told me that on any kind of team, you need to figure out you're like in an old Caprice station wagon, and there's like the driver of the station wagon, the passenger of the station wagon, the middle seat, and then the seat that's in the way back but facing the wrong way. So like you need to figure out, what is your position on this team? What role, what function do I play? Because if you think you're a passenger seat, like front seat driver, or if you're in the middle or in the way back, depending on, and those aren't bad roles to be in, but really figuring out what those roles are and where do I fit on this team. And sometimes that can happen where during the process of getting excited about the field, interviews, applications, everything, everyone's excited. And then you're thinking, oh, I'm like in the passenger seat on the station wagon. And then you get to the team and you're like, oh, I'm in the way back. And I didn't even realize that. So yeah, figuring that out before you go is really helpful.
Yeah. And so talking about team dynamics with just our, the people that are from maybe our home country that we're serving with and working with, what are some maybe challenges and blessings of being in a multicultural team? Because obviously, Action, we have a lot of partnerships with local churches and local ministries and local workers. How does that play into team dynamics?
Yeah, we loved being on a multicultural team. I mean, there definitely were struggles, but I like talking about the positive things.
Sure.
We loved just being able to learn from each other. It was a great way to say we all agree on these different things. We're all agreeing to be part of this team. And so it felt like a mostly safe space to be able to learn from one another, that we could say, I don't understand the culture out there. This thing happened to me. I don't know what's going on. What does that mean? Can you just explain it to me? It felt like a safe space to have those kinds of conversations. And also just really, we served with some really great people that gave us, I think, just they broadened our understanding of God's work in the world and realizing, wow, this is incredible. Like, it sort of turned our black and white vision into color vision of what we saw God doing in the world, and seeing that there was more than one way that things could be done like we thought they had been done. And so getting to serve with one another and just have a deeper understanding and experience of that was really amazing.
Yeah, I think just being aware of how you navigate conflict, or maybe not coming at things from the same angle if you're on a multicultural team, and just both sides kind of understanding the different cultures. I think sometimes the folks going to the host culture can do a lot of research ahead of time. Like, okay, I'm going to this type of culture. This is how they handle power, and this is how they handle dynamics, and this is how they handle decision making. Is it more like group decision making, or like is there kind of the strong leader that just takes charge and does it? Is there an expectation to work on weekends, or is there like all of those types of things? But then also, if you have a national team, like trying to do orientation the other way too. Like, if you're primarily an American team, how do mostly Americans handle these types of situations? And we tried to do some of that in our team, and that was really helpful for our Zambian colleagues to be like, oh, yeah. And then they would joke around about it later on, like, oh, you guys are so American, or of course you're doing it this way. And of course we're not eating real food for this meeting, because it's not national food. It's like you're doing sandwiches from America and stuff like that. So those are all just helpful things. So there's not like this tension of like, why is this going on right now?
Yeah, that's helpful. So giving that orientation and heads up and awareness for them. Yeah, I think it's important to do a lot of research ahead of time. And as you go to the field and as you're there, to have that posture of humility of, whatever may have worked for conflict resolution or team dynamics in your home country, just shelve that. Just kind of check that at the door, so to speak, when you arrive in your host country, and have that teachable spirit, that humble heart, that maybe this worked where I'm from, but it might not necessarily work here, and don't hold fast to that, right? And I think I've seen a lot of people that have traveled and short-term teams and even long-term workers that hold fast to that and try to make that round peg fit in that square hole and just kind of shove it in. But it just does more damage than good more often than not. And then it will create that disunity within the team. And it's just not a good witness when you're in that host country and people don't see you working as a unified team. So that's really important.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to research and figure out in a different country, like, how is their school system? How did most people grow up and go to school? Do they use, a British style system or a different style of system? And then in corporate offices or a lot of business environments, how does this culture, this country kind of work? Because if you kind of know the basics of that, if you're bringing people onto your team that are nationals, they're probably coming from that school or that business context, at least in part. So they might start doing things where you're like, why are they doing that? It's like, well, because everyone who's involved in business in Zambia or in the Philippines or whatever would operate this way. Right. But you don't understand what's going on. So it's really important to kind of figure out those things ahead of time.
Yeah. Yeah. So now moving more, we're kind of there at this point, the transitioning into conflict, but conflict arises, things happen. Even when you're not trying to create conflict, whether it's the enemy or just your flesh, creating conflict. Conflict is normal, right? It happens. But how do you work through that? How do you work through conflict in a team? How do you work through that in your host culture as you're serving? That can be challenging.
I'll let Kristin go first.
I mean, obviously, it helps to have some understanding of how to deal with conflict, and so using some resources, sort of pre-studying. I think conflict is a good thing to think through, like no matter where you're at, whether you're a missionary or not. So, the Peacemaker, that was one that our church recommended for us before we left, and was really helpful. I think, actually, when we were first married, we read that book, and I'm like, this needs to be on my annual reading list. It's because there's just so many ways that things can go wrong in relationships. So developing a healthy and biblical framework for peacemaking and conflict resolution is really helpful. I think, understanding that it's going to arise, and so not being afraid of it. I was really surprised because I thought, I'm a peacemaker. I always thought I love things to be at peace. And then I realized through that book that, no, I'm a conflict avoider. And so there's a big difference. And how do you, we want to strive toward peacemaking and having good conflict resolution skills. So I think one verse, though, that I've always gone back to that's been just so helpful is in Philippians, when Paul is telling them, to the brothers and sisters, to agree in the Lord. Euodia and Syntyche, agree in the Lord. You guys really are moving toward the same goal. Yeah. We are in the Lord. Both of you are in the Lord. Yeah. So let's try to agree. Yeah. Find those common areas that we can agree in. We saw it on the field where the stress arises and conflict arises, and how quickly you jump from, we're on the same team, we love Jesus, to, I don't think they're a Christian. It's wow, we really need to simmer down and see each other as you are my sister, brother in the Lord. Yeah. And so let's get there first, and remember, I've been bought with the blood of Christ, and you have been bought with the blood of Christ. And if God can, through Christ, come and redeem me and get me, out of when I'm his enemy. Yeah. We need to be able to get there with each other as well. Yeah. And also I think understanding a framework of spiritual warfare, because that's one just easy way that the enemy wants to take advantage of our relationships to distract us from the work that's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think just understanding cross-cultural conflict and how things can be going on that you don't even realize are happening. So in certain cultures, depending on where you're at, you may be very direct in confronting someone else about a conflict issue. And in other cultures, you would say it more generally to the group, Like,
Right.
being kind of late is hard, guys. So let's make sure. But everyone would kind of know we're talking to this person over here.
Yeah.
And then other cultures, it would be, I need to talk to this person so they can go around here and talk to this person. But eventually it gets figured out.
Yeah.
So being aware of those kind of cultural dynamics, and usually if you have national partners that are pretty versed in like multiple cultures, they'll give you help and be like, yeah, I think for this person, we should talk directly, or we should go
This is how to handle
roundabout or whatever it is. And then the thing is, like, what are your cultural values in conflict? So for instance, a lot of cultures will be like, being angry is the worst sin in a conflict.
Right.
And then other cultures would say, no, lying is the worst sin. So in Zambia, at times, you would have the situation where a Zambian, to save face, would kind of, from an American standpoint, we'd be like, you're lying. And then the American would get really angry.
Yeah.
And the Zambian would say, but you're getting so angry. Like, you're committing the worst thing here. And the other person say, no, you're committing the worst thing here. And then it's like, so you're both having these conflicts and you're passing each other and not even really getting to the root of the issue. So being aware of those types of things are really helpful.
So leadership issues, you guys have written down here, differing ministry philosophies, cultural misunderstandings. It seems like it's not so heavy on theological things, right? I mean, of course, there are teams that are divided and things happen where, okay, we're just not on the same page theologically, which you should kind of know that ahead of time with your organization if you align or not. But a lot of these things that the enemy uses, and you talked about, Kristin, spiritual warfare, the enemy uses little tiny things, right? Small things, leadership struggles, humility, people not listening well, right? Different things that people would maybe do in methodology for ministry that you might not agree with, but they're not causing any sin issues. It's not a deep theological or doctrinal issue. It's not this unbiblical thing, but it's just something that's different, that people are doing it in a different way. But things like those small things can fester and cause wedges between a team. And so, being aware of those things. And again, it's all communication, right? Communicate, be open and honest with one another. I think it's easy for our flesh to just kind of back off and just let things fester and just get annoyed, but to approach that person when it's culturally appropriate, but use that mediator. In the Philippines, you have to find someone, a third party that's not in the issue, that's unbiased, and talk to them, and then they help you navigate that.
Right.
So that's really important. My wife has helped me burn less bridges over the years, for sure. So I used to just light matches and throw them on burning bridges, just light the bridges on fire.
Right.
But pressing into that and knowing that it's the enemy that's trying to divide and seek to destroy what God is doing through you. So that's important.
Well, and I would say too, that again goes back to those expectations where, and we tell people this as they go through our application process. Like, if you're part of an interdenominational mission, you really need to be okay with being a part of an interdenominational mission and are saying, we're going to be about these core things as evangelicals. But for everyone, that's not where they're at, and that's okay. Maybe you need to be a part of a denominational mission or a little bit more of a narrowed, focused mission where you can say, I'm really theologically aligned with this organization, and I feel the most comfortable serving. Because otherwise, it's just going to be conflict all the time because you're not going to have those same values. So you really have to make sure that you're in the right fit for an organization.
So talking now about priorities, right? Again, a good transition that we just are creating here is talking about theology, but the maintaining your priorities. What are the main things that we should be thinking on and keeping in our focus, kind of in our lane, if you will, as we pursue ministry and missions?
I just think if we are keeping the main thing, keeping Christ center in our hearts and in our families, and keeping those Sabbath rest, like if we're just going all the time and burning the candle at both ends, we're not going to be in a good place.
Sure.
And especially dealing with living cross-culturally and the stresses that creates. There was one time I was in a stressful season of ministry, and I was just feeling like I need a break. I just need to get out for a minute. And the Lord led me to the passage in Luke, I believe, where Jesus had just learned that John the Baptist had been beheaded, his cousin, and his cousin had died, and he wanted to go away to the mountains. He wanted to go pray and be with the Father. And all these people kept coming after him.
That's right.
And his response was he was filled with compassion for them. And I'm like, well, that's not what my heart would be.
Right.
But dependence on the Spirit. And if you can get away, you try. You make that effort. And if you can't, if it's not able to happen, just trust that the Lord, ask him for that mercy and grace to continue, for him to give you the strength to serve in the strength that he provides. And so sometimes it doesn't work, but keep on striving, to make sure that those relationships are in a good place.
Yeah. What you have here, choosing between good opportunities and God's best, avoiding the savior complex. I think that's something that I think everybody struggles with, right? But that does help in maintaining your priorities, looking out for the team. Not going there to save the world. Go as a learner. And I think that's a priority that we should have. Go as a humble learner. We should always be learning and growing in our knowledge of the Lord and of missions and ministry, how to work well with one another. That's something that transitioning into relationships with the nationals and locals, and we've talked about that already, but there is that balance of friendship and ministry role. I'd like to talk about that for a few minutes, like the professionalism, right? What do you guys think about that in terms of the ministry roles and creating those boundaries and professionalism?
Yeah, I think there's always just a challenging balance with all of that. So, yeah, because there's things that other cultures expect that as Americans we can find really demeaning, or like, I don't naturally come across this authoritative in this situation, but in this culture, if you're the leader in this situation or the head person, in charge of this ministry, you need to have that authority and exercise that authority to a certain extent. On the other hand, I know that there was a time when our director in Zambia helped clean up all the chairs after a service. And I heard from 2 Zambian pastors after that, that was a really good reminder for me that, your director, he doesn't always wear a suit and tie. He's really nice, and he's servant-hearted, and he helped, clean up the chairs. And that kind of challenged me. I need to do a better job of that. Yeah. So there's always that tension between, being cultural, but then also being biblical. Sure. And, challenging that culture at times too. But that also challenges your own culture too.
Yeah.
It really is it's a good opportunity to just sort of be a good listener, be a good learner. I think we come in, we don't realize how many cultural expectations and how we've been shaped culturally ourselves. Yeah. And we think we're the normal, we're doing everything biblically, and we come in and it's like, oh, you're doing that differently. And before jumping to a corrective, oh, do it this way, to be able to think, so what is the biblical approach? Is what I'm doing, is that cultural or is it biblical, and vice versa, before being able to really speak into a culture. And I think that is helpful to, just make sure that we're assessing our own cultural behaviors before speaking into situations, and just making sure that we are biblical. I grew a lot in my understanding of just relationships and so many other things, and what the Bible says about things, because I just was challenged. All of my own way of growing up and things were challenged when I went into a different context. And so, I hope that I've been a better person because of that. And I think that we all can grow in those ways as we step into other people's cultures.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think coming from a Western perspective, if you're coming from that perspective, it can be easy to feel like this is the way that we should do things.
Right.
And then realizing that, maybe the way that we're doing this is actually just kind of, kicking against the goads. Like we're not really accomplishing things here because we are trying to do things in a certain way that is that, round peg in a square hole or whatever it is. Yeah, whatever analogy you want to use there, where it just doesn't work. So for instance, if you're teaching whatever topic, like we taught in the context of HIV AIDS, there were certain topics that it was better for John as a pastor, one of our teammates, to teach on. And there were certain topics that coming from Etta as a single woman who was a counselor was better for her to talk on. And there were some topics that it was better for Kristin to cover as a married woman, where coming from a Western perspective, we might think like, well, who cares? Like anyone can talk about anything. It shouldn't matter. But in that particular context, like if you actually want to communicate and have that land and be effective for people, you might have to, it's be all things to all men so that, they might be saved. Or dealing with a difficult situation like HIV AIDS in Zambia, you need to make sure that you're tailoring the message to the folks that you're trying to reach to.
Yeah. I think the big thing for me about this conversation is communication. Communicate with the Lord, seek Him, seek His face daily, be in the Word, create that life of humility and teachability, and communicate with those who are not just your spouse and your family, but the ones that you're working with, the national believers. Communication. And I think that will destroy so many things that the enemy wants to do, because, you talk about warfare, right? The enemy the first thing they'll do is come and cut communication so that you can't communicate with the land and the air and the sea. Everything's, now it's all discombobulated and everything's just amok, right? So the enemy does the same thing to us. He tries to cut communication. He cuts communication with the spouse, with the kids, in the team dynamic relationship, with the national believers, national churches. Communication's a mess, and things start to just really fester and cause a lot of problems. But well, thanks for bringing up so many really important things about relationships, and definitely a lot of food for thought and very helpful for sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Adam.
Thanks.